All right, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's your good friend Pozzible here, and I'm really excited. I can tell you that right now. I've been working on this one for quite some time. I've been watching these shows once or twice just to make sure I got them down. Hard to do when you consider what kind of movies these are. There's an interesting look at a forgotten series, more than just a forgotten classic, more of one movie. It's 4 movies that are all going to be remembered in this one video right here, and they're all about the blind dead. Um, Back in the 1970s in Spain, someone came up with this idea of creating the slowest moving zombies you could ever imagine. And that became these 4 movies from 1972 to 1977. So we start off with spoilers, just so you know. I will be holding anything back when it comes to these movies. I figure they're old enough. I know not many people have heard of these because, let's face it, they're just not that exciting. You know, a few years from now, Paranormal Activity will be just like The Blind Dead. All right, so let's start off with The Tombs of the Blind Dead, the movie that started it all. It starts, of course, with it's in Spain. Now, it's important to note that there is a difference between the American version and the Spanish version. And for the first 2 movies, when you get the TVDs, you get both versions. But after that, you don't get the American version, and I'm not really sure why. I'm not really sure if there's anything different after that. But the first 2, there were some major changes when it comes to the Blind Dead. But one thing doesn't change, and that's how these movies start, with a scream. Good old-fashioned horror. They just have somebody screaming for no reason, and that's literally how this movie begins. The lady just, out of nowhere, just as soon as the credits start rolling, bam, scream, and that's supposed to get everyone interested. The original jump scare, if you will. All right, but the story, if you can call it that, actually begins on a train. Well, it begins at a hotel, where Roger and Virginia, the 2 people on the left, on the right, run into Betty, the girl on the left. Now, Betty and Virginia, I wish it was Veronica. It'd be so funny if it was Betty and Veronica, but it's Betty and Virginia, used to be roommates back in the day at their boarding school in Spain. You know what that meant? Oh, yeah, baby. Now, if you watch the American version, you don't get to see this much. You only get to see that much. You get the idea that they were, hitting on each other, but you didn't know how far they went until you watch the Spanish version. Now, of course, this is still a 1970s movie. It's not porn. It's not too bad, but they're showing a lot more than what you see here. Now, anyway, Betty and Virginia used to be roommates, and they meet at a hotel, but they decided, since they're going to this one village, to invite Betty along. Now, this does not sit well with Virginia, who decides that she wasn't really too happy with her lesbian path and didn't want to get back into that. So she takes off and decides to camp out at a local chapel. One of those abandoned chapels in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, she came packed with her clothes, toothbrush, sleeping bag, and radio. Now, if you're from the 1970s like I am, and don't get me wrong, I wasn't there for much of the 1970s. I was born halfway in the middle of it. I call serious foul on that radio. The radios from that day and age weren't that great. If you were a mile, 2 miles out of town, you didn't get a radio signal. Well, this girl's in the middle of nowhere. She's miles from any place, so she shouldn't be able to listen to the radio. But listening to the radio was probably her big mistake, because that's how the evil dead woke up. Now, you also have to wonder about that, because in the middle of this, so for some reason, the bells chime. And when the bells chime, these guys wake up. Well, does that happen every night? And what do they do if no one's there? Do they just hang out and talk about old war stories, or come out of their Christmas and be like, oh, here comes Bob again with his limp, and talk about that? Or what do you guys do if no one's there? But luckily for them, in this case, Virginia was there. Now, also, there's a question when it comes to the Evil Dead. How many of these guys are there? Sometimes you see only 3. Other times there's legion of them. All right, but we'll get to that later. I have to address the horses, because in every single one of them, except for one movie now, in all of them, there are the horses. And whenever they brought out the horses, they always put the horses in slow motion. It didn't matter who was riding the horses. the horses were always in slow-mo. If there were people, or for the most part when the blind dead were riding them, they were always there. Now, how did the horses get involved in this? I get that the evil dead made their deal with the devil, sacrificed the virgins. They get damned. They get damned to hell, and to walk the earth for all eternity. But how did their horses get involved in that deal? Did the horses have to put their hoof mark on it or something? I don't know. But the point is, the horses come out and they go after Betty because, she was playing her radio and everything, most likely. One of the things you have to remember about these movies, yes, the Evil Dead moved slower than molasses in the wintertime. And yes, they couldn't see anything. But what really helped them out was the fact that everyone panicked and was screaming the whole time they were there. So they could easily see. You didn't have to be blind. The people were making more than enough noise to get caught. So Virginia, all by herself, gets caught. She's zombie meat, of course. Now, the thing is, at least this time they understand. Because in the other zombie movies, the zombies want to eat your meat and flesh. But they only just take these bites. It's like one bite is good enough. It kills you, and then you become one of them. Well, here, they don't want your meat or for your flesh. They really want your blood. So they're more like vampire/zombies. But they take enough blood for her, she dies. What happens when she dies? She becomes one of the undead herself. And this is the only time this will happen. Where she will encounter the creepiest morgue assistant ever. This guy was nuts. And they literally could have made a whole movie about him. As long as he died at the end, everyone would have been happy. But he was pretty crazy. So she's part of the undead. She will be dealt with in her own way and forgotten about. While her friends, Betty and Roger, investigate what was going on. Now, of course, they want to start off with the village. Not the prisoner village. I'm talking about the village where Virginia died. So they go to this expert. Now, here is another difference between the Spanish version and the American version. During the guy's discussion, there is a flashback where they show you the Templars and one of their sacrifices. Now, in the American version, they start with that image. So, in the Spanish version, he's talking and they overlay it with these images. In the American version, we see him talking the whole time and the images are shown in the front. Okay? Either way, you get the idea. Now, the story is different per movie. Here, the Templars were sacrificing the Virgin. They came from the Orient. As a matter of fact, back in the day, it wasn't until later, like when they came over to America, they were referred to as the Templars. They were always referred to as the warriors from the Orient. As you can imagine, 1970s, the mysterious Orient was still known for its magic and mysteriousness. So these guys went on their crusades, but they got in with the wrong crowd. They became Satanists. And because they became Satanists, they began to sacrifice their virgins so that they could live forever. Well, they got their part of the bargain to live forever. However, now they must do it as the undead. And this guy here tells them all about it. What happened to the Templars, though, according to the first movie, was that they were captured by the village folk who had enough of their sacrificing their women, hung them up, and let the ravens eat out their eyes. And that's how they lost their sight in the first movie. Remember that because it's going to change. So these guys are like, okay, cool, we're going to figure this out. I forget the reason why, but they went after the professor's son because they actually suspected he did it. They weren't willing to really believe that the Evil Dead were part of this, so they got him involved, and his girlfriend, Maria, was also there. Now, the funny part is that Maria is, for some reason, very jealous of this guy. And believe me, this guy is a complete scumbag. The first thing he ever says when we meet him is, your jealousy flatters me, is what he says to her. Even though he's a big two-timer or anything, it's hard to imagine that any woman worth her salt, bad girl or good girl, would ever want to be involved with a guy like this. They really made him into a scumbag. But he's really just a smuggler, He really had nothing to do with it. And in some ways, believe it or not, he's kind of the innocent victim of this story, even though he is far from innocent and definitely not a victim. But the point is that he had nothing to do with Virginia's death, and he has nothing to do with the overall story. But they get him to come along anyway with her as they all go to investigate what happened to Virginia by spending the night at the chapel. Now, one of the big mistakes they make is he decides to get Betty alone for a walk. Now, if you see the Spanish version, you know that he rapes her. It's pretty graphic. If you see the American version, you only see her getting her clothes back on, but you can tell it was not a good night of sex for these two. But that's okay. You are more than happy when the Templars come back out of their graves to bring justice to Pedro. Now, that's really not their purpose. They're here to kill everybody, even Betty and Roger and Maria. So, and this brings us to one of the most hilarious parts of just how stupid these people are and how stupid these movies can get. As soon as the Templars kill Roger, they chop off his arm because he was banging on the door the whole time trying to get in. But Maria wasn't going to let him in until Pedro showed up, but Pedro was already dead by this point. But here's the funny part. As Roger lay dying in Betty's arm, he tells her, don't make any noise because they can't hear, because they won't be able to hear you. They're blind. Remember that? Well, that is a great plan, Napoleon. Why didn't you use it yourself instead of banging on the door like somebody at a loud party? Grant you, he wanted to get inside. But once he learned that he couldn't get inside, what was the point of that, you know? Well, I'll tell you one point of it. We got to see a pretty cool cat fight. I've seen better cat fights, but it was a pretty cool cat fight. Well, Betty, sitting there, lying still, with her heart beating out of her chest, the Templars were able to find her, locate her, and give chase to her. And that brings us to the beginning of the movie again, where we realize the horror of her bringing the Templars to a train where they got to slice up some people. And the train got back to the station. How a train stopped all by itself? Oh, no, that's right. The train never did stop by itself. Somebody jumped on the train and was able to shut it off. But luckily for Betty, the Templars started the train, sent her home, and that was the end of Tombs of the Blind Dead. Not bad, because I'll tell you one thing you gotta love about these first movies. They don't want to tell you everything. They just want to tell you enough information to let you know what was happening, who these guys were, why they killed everybody. It was pretty smart for back in the day. Usually, this was before the Friday the 13th and stuff like that, where you had psycho killers just killing people just to kill people. It was a pretty good movie. It wasn't perfect. These guys, like I said, they're the slowest moving people you'll ever see. You wonder, what's the horror? All these people have to do is walk briskly away from them, and they can get away. It weren't for those darn horses on slow motion that could get them. Well, the movie was pretty good and worthy of a sequel. So in 1973, yes, a year later in real time, because we didn't have to deal with so much post-production crap. Yeah, remember, you think the sequels and the reboots and the remakes and all that stuff are bad today? Imagine how bad they were back in the 60s and 70s and 80s when you could literally have them 1 year apart, I mean, let's face it, we had the Avengers a few years ago, and now finally we get our next one coming out in May. However, back in these days, it didn't take them long to make these movies. So they could really churn them out. That's why Roger Moore has so many James Bond movies under his belt. Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan, they'll only be able to make like 3 or 4 because of all the time in between, not to mention financial difficulties. But back in these days, they didn't have that. And you could just churn out movies like that, literally it's a movie factory. All right, so Return of the Evil Dead is supposed to be the sequel to Tomb of the Blind Dead. And of course, they use a different title because they really didn't know what they were doing or anything back then. Now, this one is supposed to happen directly after it, if you want to believe that, because technically I do not. Here's my biggest issue I have with that. This movie, happening directly after the first movie, has no mention of the first movie. There's no mention of a train. There's no mention of the events that happened on it, or the crazy lady who came out screaming and hollering from a train full of dead people. And by the way, another difference between the American and Spanish version, In the American version, all you see is the Knight Templars walking into the train. In the Spanish version, you actually see them slashing and dicing some people up, even grabbing a small child, giving the impression that they're cutting that child up too. That's how horrible and bad guy these people are, but it was too bad for American audiences. That said, we're back in the town. That's the one thing we do have going for us. We're back in the town where the blind dead are a few miles away from it. Long enough that, boy, it'd be, but by the time they get there, it would have been, the next day. These guys move so slow. But we have, oh, and by the way, yes, there are some differences between the Spanish and American version. All right, so in this one, we have Jack, Captain Jack. A captain of what? I don't know. They didn't really tell us. He's a moron, because let's face it, you can't be intelligent and be in a movie like this. But Vivian wanted him to present fireworks to her people so that she could, get back in with Jack and get his jock again. And Jack wanted to get back in with Vivian somewhat. He's the macho man, so he's not going to be that. He's not going to really be too much into his feelings or anything like that. But Vivian here hires him because she's in with the mayor and his henchman Howard. Okay, important people. We'll talk about them later. But she wants him for his fireworks so that they can celebrate the festival. The festival 500 years ago. The town folk, the village people, not the singing group, the actual real deal, the village group killed the Templars. And this time, the village people blinded the Templars with their torches. Remember that, okay? And the Templars were buried, same old, little bit change of the story. Now, what's interesting is that there is a village idiot in this show. In this case, he's kind of deformed. He's actually a lot smarter than he leaves on, but boy, is this guy ever bullied. And it's that bullying that leads him to, if you watch the Spanish version, he's the guy who frees the Templars. He wakes them up. That's what you're supposed to believe, okay? In the American version, you get the idea that it was the fireworks, all the noise. Remember, these are the blind Templars. They can only hear their stuff. So like Daredevil, the evil version of Daredevil. So it's all the fireworks, all the rambunctious partying. That's what got these guys woken up. Even though in the movie, he says, I woke you up, but you never see him actually do anything. In the Spanish version, you see him actually sacrificing a woman to wake these guys up. All right? So, to a different version, that's really the major difference. There's a few other minor things, but nothing worth mentioning. So here we got the village idiot who frees the Templars, and instead of running and panicking, they fight. That's right, the Templars with their swords. I give the Templars a hard time. They do move very slowly, even on their horses. But these guys are very strong. Remember, they got the concrete blocks on top of their sarcophaguses and stuff, but they're able to lift them up and move them to the side so that they can get out. You'll see those parts. They take a long time. Oh yeah, they're trying to generate the suspense and everything, if you can believe that. So the town folks now are fighting. Oh, by the way, the guy to the left, the gray-haired guy, that's Howard. He's really into Vivian, though Vivian wants nothing to do with him. These guys get their picks and axes and everything they possibly can to fight him. They'll even use fire. Yes, the one thing they finally revealed in this movie is that the Templars are very susceptible to fire. They fear it, mainly because A, they were burned. When they were first blinded, they were burned. And B, fire can actually destroy them. The whole fires of hell type of thing. That's why they only use the fire once. They never use this fire again after they set one of the Templars on fire. They even bring out torches and swing the torches back and forth, trying to keep the Templars away, but to no avail. Ultimately, they never try to set the Templars on fire. And when I saw that one Templar get caught on fire, he was pretty flammable, but they never do it again. So they use the torches, they keep him away, and they try to do it at the whim of the mayor. That's the guy on the left. He's fat. He's greedy, he's in power, but he's really kind of worthless himself as a human being. And boy, do they show that. He's able to, once these people, the Templars are coming, and once they decided that they're outnumbered by the Templars, because at first you see 3, then you see 300, then you see 5, then you see 300, then you see 10, then you see 300, they decide to make a run for it. And the Templars are all over the town. They're slaughtering everybody. They're getting their revenge on the town people that blinded them 500 years ago. Their descendants. And now the mayor, Vivian, Howard, Jack, some couple, a girl, the village idiot, they're all in this church trying to protect themselves. And it doesn't really work because the mayor is tricking a lot of people out to go rescue somebody and to get the car that the people drove. They drove it all the way over here and then they stopped and they ran out to get into the church. Why? Because this idiot told them to. Well, he got his comeuppance, didn't he? The point is, the Templars, they're slow, but they're not dumb. They're scattered all over the place. So it's kind of an equidistant kind of thing. And even though the Templars can't see you, they can hear you. So as long as they get close, they can move very slowly into your general direction. Now this mayor here is real scum. He's a guy who would even let a little girl out into the courtyard full of Templars so that her noise will distract the Templars while he gets away. It doesn't work. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is the best ending ever. The Templars. How are they finally defeated? They deflate. Oh yes. I'm not saying the Templars fall down. No. They slowly but surely fall apart. The only thing missing, if you ever have a balloon, fill it full of air, and then let the air out slowly, that little noise, that's what this movie could have used. These guys just literally fall down. Our heroes did absolutely nothing to finally defeat the Templars. Now, I will admit one thing. The ending was kind of suspicious because finally someone used their brains and said to themselves, okay, let's walk out very quietly and make no noise, otherwise the Templars will hear you. So it was kind of suspenseful to see the 3 people, Jack, Vivian, and the little girl, very quietly sneak out. Okay? But then the Templars just deflate. And it's like, you gotta be kidding me. That is one of the dumbest endings I've ever seen in my life. It was brilliant. So, we have here what was probably the last time the Blind Dead ever dealt with their past. This is the last time the Blind Dead were actually pretty good. They're moving too fast now. 1972, they had all this time, they made up a show. 1973, they were able to come out with their next show. 1974, they decided to go all the way down into Dullville. Now let me tell you something. There is so bad there are good movies, there are campy movies, and then there's 50 feet of crap. And below that crap there's the Ghost Galleon, also known as the Horror of the Evil Dead, also known as Ghost Ships of the Blind Dead. Ghost ships? I don't know why they said that. There's only one ship. But the point is, we're going to start this story all the way over in a completely different setting. Same villain, different location completely. So first off, let's get back to the modern world, into a modeling agency. Modern world in a model agency. Here we have, what's her name? Naomi on the left, who's very upset with Kathy on the right. Because her lover slash roommate is, yes, that's right, we're back with lesbians. Her lover slash roommate is missing off on what has to be the worst publicity stunt ever. That's right. The whole idea, I forget what they were trying to promote, some fashion line or something like that. But these girls were told to get in a boat, go in the middle of nowhere, and yet somehow these models always knew exactly where they were, despite the fact that they were in the frickin' ocean the whole time. I guess it must be that modern equipment everyone loves so much. Well, anyway, they're supposed to be on a boat and they're supposed to be rescued or seen, and that's supposed to promote their stuff. Is, hey, models are stuck in the middle of the ocean needing to be rescued, and that's a publicity stunt, and it's stupid. But that's okay, this whole movie was stupid, so I can't stop with that. So anyway, The girls floating around. Okay, get this, and I kid you not with what I'm about to say. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but it just doesn't sound right. The girls are floating in a part of the ocean that can get no fog because it's too hot. That is literally what they said. Professor Gruber, I'll introduce you him in a moment. He said that where they are, there could be possibly no fog whatsoever. They're in the middle of the ocean. Okay, and then I believe in all parts of the ocean there should be fog. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can't believe that. Okay, back to the ship. They finally run into the ghost ship, who shows up right away. And as you can tell, it looks this bad. The ghost ship looks like a toy boat in a bucket. Even by 1970s standards, this was pretty cheesy special effects, if you can call it that. So what do you do when you see a broken down barge that could probably break apart if you step on it? You explore it, of course. You look around, you see what you can find. Little did they know that it was the ship of the blind dead. They're back, and this time people don't remember that they're blind. That's okay though. So now the girls are in trouble, but it's up to Howard on the left, Vivian, Professor Gruber holding the cross on fire, and Sergio to rescue them. They sent a helicopter first, but the helicopter couldn't find them. So they took a boat over there. Now Kathy is with them also, but let's just say she doesn't come to a good end. The point I'm trying to make is this. Professor Gruber, if you ever wanted to hear a human being give you the clunkiest exposition in the world, just spew nonsense that made no sense whatsoever, that's your man. He really went crazy. Now, of course, these other people were supposed to be part of the modern world who didn't believe in such hocus pocus and ridiculous nonsense. Even people who believe in this kind of stuff wouldn't believe this guy's crap. And he wouldn't have made it. Now, this guy was able to figure out a way to get the blind dead back into their sarcophaguses, back into their, tombs and everything. So what do? You throw the tombs overboard! That's right! That's just brilliant. All the evil dead, so now you're supposed to be safe, right? You just threw everyone overboard. It's supposed to be okay, but it didn't really work out. Because remember, the other thing they said is that they're actually in another dimension. Oh yeah, this whole fog thing wouldn't happen in our dimension, but would happen in their dimension. That's where we are. So this isn't happening in our world. It's happening in their world. And somehow there was a doorway between those worlds in the middle of the ocean, of all places. But they were able to save themselves from the blind dead, but they decided to leave anyway with all the treasure they could possibly find. Well, one guy tries to do it anyway. Doesn't really work out for him. Now, the one thing I didn't like on IMDb is that IMDb tried to convince me that this was a very ambiguous ending, meaning you didn't understand what it meant. I'll tell you what it meant. They got out of the boat. They swam to shore. And who followed them? The blind dead. 3 of them? No, probably more. But you can never tell in these movies. The number of blind dead alter. Now, very slowly, very meticulously, these guys are moving up. It probably would have taken them 30 minutes of actual time to get from the water to the beach where these guys were sitting. Now, these guys could have gotten away if they just would have stood up and walked at a nice pace away from these guys. Didn't work out. Trust me, in Ghost Galleon, everyone dies. That's how this movie ends. It's not rocket science, people. It's just one of those movies where everyone's killed. Good old-fashioned horror. Could have been a lot better if they just would have put in some extra thought into it. Instead, it falls into absurdity, and the Ghost Galleon is the beginning of the end of the Blind Dead collection. If you thought the first 2 were bad, or that it just gets worse, trust me, nothing is as bad as Night of the Seagulls. Here we finally reach the Turtle Blind Dead's end, and we couldn't be more happier. You couldn't ask for a worse movie here. Here you got Dr. Henry Stein, probably one of the worst doctors you can imagine because he gets assigned to a village out in the middle of nowhere. How that works, I'm not sure, but he goes to meet the local doctor, not really being sure of the local custom and being treated extremely rudely. If there was ever a movie where you would wonder if the blind dead could just come out of their graves and kill everyone, you'd be happy. This is that movie. You really didn't care for anybody because he was too dumb, she was too weak, and everyone else was too rude. Now we have to be nice about this. After all, every 7 years for 7 days, the seagulls fly at night, hence the name, and they have to sacrifice one of their maidens to the blind dead. Naturally, if I had to be in a world like that, I'd be pretty cross too. She's sad that her daughter had to be sacrificed. He's upset too, but they don't want this guy ever getting involved. Now, this is the one thing that I hate in any movie. If you are keeping our quote-unquote hero / main character, and I use the terms loosely here, if you're keeping him in the dark, it's best to keep us in the dark as well. He doesn't have a clue what's going on. We know perfectly well what's happening, but nobody wants to tell him for drama's sake. Nobody wants to keep him informed because of reasons. But it's just so stupid, and it's lazy storytelling to be beating the bush on a secret we already know what the answer is. So we just get pissed at this movie, and believe me, it's very easy to get pissed at Night of the Seagulls. You struggle with watching this. So this guy, after a few nights, I think it's like 3 or 4 nights, I can't remember if it was the last night or whatever, because remember, it's not until the end that somebody finally tells him that every 7 years, 7 maidens have got to be sacrificed. One thing I will wonder, though, because they didn't tell you the whole 7 years, 7 maidens thing, but I remember when they started this whole thing, I kept wondering, how does a town like this even have babes, considering they kill them every year? They kill them every day, But the point is, the doctor is not told this. He's not aware of this. He doesn't do his best to keep himself out of it, so he goes down and rescues the maiden. Luckily, the Templars are as slow as ever, even though when they swing those swords, it's pretty lethal. They swing those swords, he frees the maiden, and the villagers just leave. After everything they've been through, after everything that's happened, they just walk away. That easily. Pretty dang simple. I have to admit, I was impressed by that. And of course, we got the horses back. Now, the trick of all this comes at the end. Because you got this sea monster here, you got an example of what they do. Somehow, this idiot doctor is able to figure out that this idol is the key to it all. That this idol is the reason these guys are able to stay alive and all that. And they have to keep sacrificing their maidens to this idol. They break the idol, it's game over. And luckily for us and everyone involved, real world and movie world, it is true. The Knights Templars' last movie, Night of the Seagulls, ends on a very sour note, but at least it ends. And that's one thing you have to admit. Now, I'll be honest with you. Jesus Franco, he did make, in 1985, sort of a sequel to this, you might say, or a remake, or whatever you want to call it, called Mansion of the Living Dead. And some people consider it canon to this, some people do not. I just consider it porn. That's all it really was. It was just porn. Just a bunch of lesbians. It had Lena Romay. If you know her, she's always involved with his movies, and she was always his sex symbol and everything. His muse, you might say. But yeah, Night of the Seagulls, a horrible end to something that had really good potential. Here was the ultimate worst thing about this movie, though. Stock footage. You could tell they were reusing some of the images from the first 2 movies over and over again, especially to make this movie to fill up some of the fillers. These movies are classics in that they are very good for a particular group. These are the kind of movies people go for when they think of the old, cheesy, campy, poorly done, and yet oddly attractive, oddly, enjoyable. Because you can only imagine just how stupid these movies were and how stupid it was to make them. But maybe they fit into the so bad they're good category. Maybe they fit into the campy category, cheesy category. Or maybe they just fit into a movie that says, damn, I actually like that. I personally had to admit, I did not. But hey, that's just me. The first one was okay. But then second one, it just started going downhill. Alright guys, that's it for me today. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you at the theaters.